Kyle, what's up? How you doing this week, man? What's going on?
Good, good. How you doing?
I'm
We,
doing well.
I hear you got some tasty stuff to talk about today. The IT operating model.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably more educated in talking about it than me, but it's definitely something that we are talking a lot about over here. And the reason why is, over the so our traditional kind of key client segment were companies that were call it 250 million in revenue up to about 5 billion. And over the last year, like we've broadened that in both directions, right? I mean, we've ended up with quite a few clients that are larger than that. Typically, they're engaging us on like an initiative driven basis, right? So they've got something very specific. They want to improve their customer experience. So we'll come in and do something in the contact center, or they want to move their voice to the cloud, right? So we'll come in and do something like that. But on the other end of that spectrum, companies call it 50 million in revenue to about 250 million. We're seeing it's like it's the inverse, right? They're not wanting to engage us in an initiative driven way. And part of the reason is like they oftentimes don't have people in those companies to even identify the primary initiatives that are the biggest value creation. What they're engaging us in is generally a more holistic type review, and the way that those have shaped up is we end up really looking at the IT operating model, because these companies are really challenged, right? They're almost all private equity owned, so they're working to build a scalable, resilient infrastructure, to do risk mitigation. They know they need those types of things for their next turn or for the next sell. But at that size, they're typically still like a very, very lean IT team.
Yeah,
Oftentimes there's no CIO. It may be an IT director reporting into the CFO, or a COO or something like that. Obviously, it depends on industry here, but what we're seeing there is, and the way that those engagements are shaping up, is we're ending up advising on and then ultimately executing on the roadmap to really mature the IT operating model. And so that has been really like great area for us over the last year, but also like really interesting because it's traditionally we did a whole lot of sourcing and it impacted the IT operating model, but now we're kind of coming at it from the other direction and we're really focusing on the IT operating model at that size company. And then sourcing is one of the things that's occurring inside there.
yeah, yeah. I'd say up market. What I hear you saying is sometimes it's a little bit more of a discrete work stream or an initiative. Some of the ones that you're talking about in that kind of more middle market space where um, it's a wider aperture of even just thinking about the strategy itself, not necessarily just a single procurement project, but how are we thinking about our IT team? Which pieces of that value chain are we bringing in versus not? Like how are we managing and then accelerating through that kind of growth period, right? Because you got to this one point, you got acquired by private equity or private equity owned, and now you're trying to get to that next milestone. So that's interesting. What kind of specific things are you seeing, either strategies or things in which they're thinking of how they manage that IT team or IT assets?
Well, I think a lot of it starts with what's the deal thesis, right? So, for instance, we'll work in a lot of roll ups, right? Well, okay, like you need a lot of focus on onboarding. You need to have a strong central services type function so that you can get the efficiency when you go and you buy a smaller company. You can roll out something that is quote unquote better, right? Like either a CRM or something that allows you to market to end users now, or something that smaller companies didn't have. But when you aggregate all of these businesses, you can provide a stronger function in that way. So a lot of it starts with the deal thesis, really. Like what is the strategy here to build value in this company, and then from there, when we talk about the IT operating model, what we're really talking about is what is the appropriate mix of staff, outside services, vendors, and products to enable scalability, resilience, and then risk mitigation, which is the security aspect that you're kind of weaving throughout all of that. I think sometimes, especially up market, like security will end up being a very distinct and discrete work stream. In this space, this $50 million to $250 million revenue companies, security needs to be something that you are weaving throughout and thinking about even in the early planning stages. Doing it after the fact is often very, very expensive, whereas doing it before the fact, and when I say doing it, I mean specifically, thinking about what your risk mitigation strategies are in that mix, is often much less expensive. Like you can do things that are much heavier on policy and process than technology, which ends up getting pretty expensive.
No, yeah, it's an interesting yet challenging space, because you are looking for that appropriate mix where at that size company, your customer base still almost expects an enterprise grade experience, but you might not have the scale of an enterprise. Obviously you don't have the scale of the enterprise company, so you might not have that much staff in-house or be able to build it yourself. So you've got to figure out which pieces are we doing internally, which pieces are we going to partner for, and what's the strategy there for vendor management, and then also making sure that you don't have too many what can become critical vulnerabilities in your infrastructure or your product, depending on kind of what industry you're in, wrapped around that IT. If you've outsourced too much of it, or if you haven't outsourced enough, right? So it feels like a little bit of a delicate dance. How are you walking clients through kind of that decision making process?
So very much it begins with we think of we don't do a lot of diligence in house. We've done some. We don't do a lot of them. Oftentimes, when we're coming into clients, they have some sort of diligence report that was done. So we're starting there. That's really an input for our early conversations. That's saying, hey, like what are critical vulnerabilities? What is it that's on the roadmap? And then back to the point before, like what's the deal thesis and the hold period? Because a really important part to think about here is, you've got anywhere from a 3 to 5 year hold period in an average PE investment, right? Well, some of these projects are quite time consuming, and so you really need to be planning for it even early in the hold period. And what you need to be planning for is not what does the company need today, but put yourself in the shoes of the possible acquirer. And when you come and you're running a diligence on that company 4 or 5 years from now, what is it that they are going to want to see to enable the next turn, right? Because so we're talking companies that are 50 million to 250. They're going to get sold on the far end of that and then be looking to double, right? To move to 500. So you're really thinking about, are you going to be able to say to an acquirer, hey, we have the infrastructure, the team, the optimal mix in place to be a platform to make a run at 500.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's really kind of that backwards planning methodology where you're starting with the end in mind, starting with the vision, and then working backwards. But doing it in a holistic way, right? Because if you're not, you're gonna end up rebuilding parts and reworking parts.
Yeah, and I'd say because you may, depending on how you came into the 50 million part, right? Like there may be a turn that gets you to 250, and then another thing to get you beyond, because as you think about what gets you to one phase won't get you to the next, right? Yeah. And so having some level of foresight, but you obviously can't build to be $1 billion company when you're 25 million, right? Like you don't have the resources to do it. Like you're gonna have to iterate, but have a thoughtful level of at what point do we plan to hit that next milestone, and then kind of reshape some of that framework.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, all that to say, like those have been like very exciting engagements for us and for our team. I mean, it's obviously exciting to bring in those companies that are over 5 billion in revenue, big, household name brand type things. Like that's cool too. But these engagements that are holistic and you're like really going deep with the executive team on those types of things, those have been a lot of fun for us, and something where we're really excited for what it enables us to do down market. So that's what I've been working on. You
Good
know?
stuff. Good
Yeah,
stuff.
cool. All right. Well, I guess that'll complete this segment. We'll take a break here and move to the next. Ring, ring.
Ding, 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 ding.
That was the most ridiculous school bell ever. But
That was not
welcome
a good.
back for this segment, School's in Session. I'm on the docket this week, and I am going to attempt to teach something to Kyle, something I've been doing a lot of research on myself because it's a really a hot topic right now. Also, it's like some recent news articles like really piqued my interest on it. And it is about evaluating the ROI of AI, which obviously like incredibly broad topic, and we're jamming it into 10 minutes here, but maybe some food for thought in it. And it's obviously something that like this is going to be a work in progress likely for years to come for organizations as they really dial in how to look at this and how to think about it. I'll start by just a little lay of the land. I think in our position, um, obviously a lot of vendors are in the marketing pieces are, hey, the ROI is great on AI, right? Like obviously, especially like when you think about the macroeconomic environment over the last couple of years, right? Every type of new service that was coming in was really getting a lot of scrutiny, like even at the CFO level. Well, how do you get a CFO to buy off on something? You tell them there's great ROI, right? You align some numbers to it, and pretty much every vendor in this space has done that. That is the glaring headlines for most vendors in this space is, hey, there's really great ROI with AI, right? Like you are going to improve your bottom line by using this. Like most marketing jargon, people are starting to question that. Some people are even questioning, like, is ROI even the right metric to look at for AI, and can we do that yet?
Yeah.
In early times of a new technology, it is often hard to do that because the use cases are still in flight. The implementation is massively unknown, right? Like when you go in, which you should have a plan, right? Like you should have theory, you should have a hypothesis on what the required investments are, what the improvements are, what you're targeting to have as outcomes in this project, but highly unpredictable right now. With the exception of potentially like some very specific use cases and things like potentially some items in the contact center, right? I think AI is like fairly mature there in some definitive use cases. Think about things like chatbot or some items like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But some people are even questioning, is like, are we even at a point where we can actually reliably talk about the ROI of AI? I would say maybe, like at a minimum, going into a project or when you're making an investment, you should have a strong thesis, right? And so when doing that, and when you're thinking about the ROI of really any technology or any implementation or any project that you're undertaking, like you should have a thesis going in. And so specific to this, like most, you've got hard and soft type of both returns as well as investments that are required here. And potentially the soft ones are where it's really, really challenging right now to understand what those are, right? So, but I'll start on the hard side, right? So, as far as the returns, the type of things that are being promised, I don't think any of these will be news to you or to any listeners. But people are saying, hey, there's going to be time savings, there's going to be cost savings, there's potentially going to be productivity increases, there's going to be revenue increases. There's maybe if you've got a large data science team that's using AI, not only are you going to get all of those, but potentially you're even going to get insights you didn't even know that were out there, right? So there's a quality type of aspect potentially. As far as the investments, like obviously you need the resources to actually execute on it, which are in high demand, and not only in high demand, they're in limited supply at a high quality level at least. And then various licenses of LLMs, potentially infrastructure investments, potentially and I'll loop back to the resource investments. Not only do you need, um, you know, people who are experienced in AI, but you also typically need a lot of data engineers or data science engineers, as well as possibly like infrastructure engineers, depending on what your current situation is, to be able to take advantage of this type of stuff. So it's kind of the possible outputs, targeted outputs, as well as the inputs needed from a hard perspective, right? Like those things are quantifiable.
Yeah.
But we'll have a little bit of an asterisk on some of those things around like the revenue increases, the productivity increases. Those are a challenge to monitor and manage, but those are quantifiable.
Is it fair to say um, it depends?
It is, but I'm
Right.
trying not to do it. It is,
Right.
right? I mean, it's like there's so much of this, right?
But but I think one of the things that you made mention of in the beginning, where AI, like that's such a broad kind of term, and there's a lot of pieces that fall underneath that, right? Like, are you talking natural language processing? Are you talking computer vision? Are you talking machine learning, deep learning, large language models, right? Like all of those different forms, and I think a lot of those, or at least some of those, have been around for a while and have proven ROI. I think the LLMs and the chat GPTs of the world kind of launched this more into the public domain recently. And so that's what has caused a lot of the buzz. But like, machine learning and some of these other things have been around for a little bit, or computer vision. I think of one of the cool use cases that I've heard about was being able to read imagery like a doctor, right? Like being able to better spot the whatever the X-rays or the images that they take of a patient, and having that computer vision or that machine, the AI essentially be able to look at that and spot things quicker, or bubble it up to where you are saving either saving time or having better level of predictability and seeing some of those things. Like I think there are, but there are a lot of unknowns still. Like it's early innings is what it feels like, right? Like
Well,
there's
even in that, right? Like, I mean, you could potentially evaluate some ROI, but a whole lot of it's going to be soft, right? I mean,
yep
ultimately, even think about that, right? Like, I mean, that application of computer vision is not going to make a diagnosis without
a
a
human.
doctor reviewing it. Now, presumably,
Yep.
it could save time, and it may even be better, like over time. I don't know, right? But like you're picking on computer vision, right? And I think that this is a good place to do it. And something to call out is there are potentially places where ROI would be a decent metric for that. But let me present an alternative where like ROI isn't even something that you would apply to it, right? And I think about like a self-driving car, right? Like without computer vision, that doesn't happen, right? So it's not an ROI type of calculation unless you're looking at like, okay, like this strategy for computer vision versus this strategy, right? But it's
Yeah.
not a, hey, if we introduce computer vision, what's the ROI on it? Like, well, this whole thing doesn't exist without it, right? So you do want to think about that, and specifically when you're talking about ROI, and this is where everybody keeps going back to use cases, like that specifically with ROI, those two, to me, those two, kind of concepts or ideas go hand in hand. If you do not have a defined use case, you really struggle to measure any ROI. You don't know what you're targeting, and you don't have a baseline, right? And so without a very, very defined use case, ROI shouldn't even be in your conversation. And I think that is an important, like a simple but important distinction that people should have as they're thinking about this topic. With a defined use case, ROI should then be in the conversation, but without it, like it's very, very challenging.
No, I can see that, and I do think it's an interesting point of when you're starting out, if ROI is or is not the right metric to start with. At some point, you probably introduce that, but maybe early on, like what you're talking about is it's a an enablement factor that without like that product or that category doesn't even exist, right? Like you have, it's the base input to even create that product. So that's an interesting one. I think another cool use case I heard of was, gosh, what was it? It was like vending machines, right? Like thousands or tens of thousands of vending machines that were all over the country, and they were using all that sensor data and pushing it through some type of AI model, and it was learning and being able to calculate at better sense of accuracy at what point they would need to replace or repair those different things in the field, right? Which was saving them a ton of dispatches, and they could project their costs better to then negotiate better with their vendors because they
Yeah.
knew, like, okay, well, if I know I need to replace this many machines, I can then go leverage that, negotiate that, in advance versus having to be reactive and like buy it onesies and twosies as it happens, right? So like it
Yeah.
enabled a whole buying power that they didn't have before.
Yeah. I mean, I probably could have told them this part of it, but you need 2 rows of Cheetos and only one of Fritos, you know, like they probably needed AI to tell them that, but I'm here to tell you the Cheetos are better than the Fritos. Um, but, uh,
But Doritos are king. So
yeah, three of those for sure. Two of the nacho cheese and one of the Cool Ranch, I believe.
there you
Um,
go. Yeah, I can live with that.
but I guess like bringing it back on part of this, the piece I didn't necessarily get into, and this is where I think a lot of the talking points and conversation and thinking should be right now, is on the soft cost side. Well, a soft cost, soft benefit side of this. On the benefit side, like potentially a better experience, right? It's potentially a better experience on the consumer side. Most likely the employee side, I would probably target that aspect first. It's only going to be a better experience though if they're knowledgeable on it and understand how to use it, and if it actually does save them time. And I would also say, like, I mean, I was listening in on one of our partners' calls earlier this week, and they were encouraging, like, hey, look, and Microsoft is recommending this as well with their Copilot stuff, like measure. They're encouraging people measure the savings time in minutes right now. Measure it in minutes. The minutes will add up over a month, but like some of these promises were like you're not taking an 8-hour workday to a 4-hour workday because of Copilot, right? Like,
Yeah.
but you can potentially take a 30-minute task to a 25-minute task, and that 10 times in the month ends up being material.
No, it does. Especially when you look at the cost, right? I mean, maybe at the expensive end, you're talking 30, 40 bucks a seat down to, half of that per user. And you think about what the salary cost of a person is per hour. And if in 1 month you saved 1 hour of work, like,
Right.
and that's probably not that hard to do with one of those tools to save 1 hour, cut 1 hour off of time. I mean, you yeah, like I definitely think the ROI is there. To your point, like it may be challenging to calculate in some of these early ones because it's still kind of taking shape and taking form of what the use case is and what you're using it for. But I definitely think it's there on the horizon as we see more and more use cases come out.
Yeah, another really kind of interesting angle on the employee side as it pertains to this is skill retention. And and obviously this depends on the industry, but think about your employees who are excited to use this technology, right? On the whole, those are probably employees that you want. Now, maybe not. Like there may be other aspects, right? And there's a lot that goes into retention and thinking about who you want to retain versus who you want to maybe let attrit. But
yeah, but at least puts a point in the keep column, right?
yeah, right. Like somebody who is exploring, proactively exploring this technology and thinking about how to use it to make their own life better and potentially the company's life better. Like, okay, well, let's say you're an organization that's not leaning into this, right? Like they may be going and looking for another organization that is. The CEO of NVIDIA had an interesting thing he was talking about, and he said, look, like AI is not coming for your job. People who use AI effectively are coming for your jobs. And I believe that employees are likely looking at places, all other things being equal, if it's a place where you can get access to AI, and be trained on it and, become a power user in that, like that's something that people are interested in.
Yeah.
And I guess the final piece in this, I mean, I'm getting a little bit long winded on it, but one of the final pieces in it, and the way I'm kind of thinking about it, I think that this is the way a fair amount of people are thinking about it from what I'm hearing, is it's a strategic imperative to explore it. Like, who knows? The whole thing may come collapsing down. Very, very unlikely, incredibly unlikely, right? But people may decide, hey, the risk isn't worth the benefit or whatever. But like, if it does go as people think it is going to, as far as the impact it is going to be able to make in business, and you're not exploring it right now, you're not dipping your toes in the water, like, well, that's a very big cost, potentially, a company changing type of cost.
Yeah.
It's really creating the space for a lot of disruption. And so to not be at least dipping your toes in the water, you're potentially way behind the ball. And so, at the end of the day,
somebody else is, right? I think that's the thing, is if you're not leaning forward into it, at least one of your competitors are.
Yeah. So I guess it's to try to sum it up. I mean, ROI when it comes to AI, very challenging right now. A lot of different angles. If you have a defined use case, you should have an ROI, model going into it that you are looking at and calculating against. If for no other reason than to build out the muscle to do it again in the future as this whole area matures. Defined use case and ROI go hand in hand in my book in this space. And then, the other piece is like, do not underestimate both the soft cost and the soft benefits here. They're very, very hard to challenge, but at a minimum, you should have some theories on what you're going in for, and then be monitoring through that project. Like, is this improving? Is this not improving? We thought it was. Why is it? Why is it not? Sort of thing.
Cool. Well, I will consider myself schooled.
I think both of us will continue having this discussion for quite a while. I mean, even internally, because this is I do see it as a strategic imperative over time. Even for myself, like me personally, right? I look at it and like in my role and in any future roles I might have, like I am going to need to be knowledgeable about this, very knowledgeable. Maybe not, almost think about it like accounting, or finance. Like, I may not need to be the smartest person in the room on it, but I'm going to need to be able to know enough to know, like, to stress test what I'm hearing. Like, is that true? Is that not true? And like, what are even the right voices that I need in that room to make a well-informed decision?
Yep.
Cool. That is a wrap